Although the upcoming release of Christopher Nolan's version of the Odyssey is still not without controversy, I believe some things have been resolved in a positive way now that we know that, quote, Elliot uh, Page will not be playing um, a fierce warrior, a fierce and manly warrior. Apparently, will be playing the part of, I can't remember the character's name right now, but a boy uh, who uh, who dies in a somewhat tragic but somewhat also comedic way by falling off of a roof and breaking his neck, falling off of Cersei's roof and breaking his neck instead of dying in battle or anything like that. Um, I think that the actor, can we say actress, I think that he, she, it um, could probably pull off the role of, a scrawny teenage boy, which it sounds like that's the role that Elliot is playing. So, um, there's still the race swapping. There's still the translation issue that Nolan was supposedly enchanted with being written by some feminist broad. Those are all still things that are being bandied about. I'm going to see the movie. I've decided I'm just interested in seeing how it all comes together or doesn't, because I think Christopher Nolan is an interesting filmmaker, and he goes about things very intricately, and whether he succeeds or fails, it's always interesting to witness. So, in preparation, I have been reading Homer's The Odyssey. Um, the translation that I'm using is not a controversial one, needless to say, not the one written by the feminist broad, the first female ever to translate Homer. And they talk about that like it's supposed to be something like I don't understand. So, if the idea is to be a translator, you want to translate it accurately. What does it matter if it's a man or a woman? You know, what matters is fidelity to the text. And yes, there is a text. There is a text. Okay, I get that the story was initially orally told before it was ever recorded, but it was at some point recorded in Greek, in the original Greek, and then that Greek text has been translated a bunch of times through the years. Now, I know this is something I'm not proud to admit, but I actually never read the Odyssey or the Iliad, uh, and I majored in English. I taught English for several years, but I managed to avoid one of the seminal works of English. Even though it's not an English written work, one of the most seminal works of Western literature. Um, and now that I'm reading it in an English translation, I still, in comparison to what made for an educated man 100 years ago, I'm still, a pathetic halfwit. I mean, it was standard at one time to learn Greek and then learn a work like the Odyssey, the Iliad, and the Odyssey, the companion pieces of those two epic poems, to learn them in the actual Greek language, just like it was normal to learn, I don't know, Latin, uh, to be able to speak Latin with some, um, you know, I don't know, the panache with some ability. And to be able to read Chaucer in the Old English form instead of having to have that be updated, to make it more understandable to us. So all this is just a preamble to say, I'm barely catching up to what a literate person, which is what I would like to think of myself as being, but compared to other men at other times, I am definitely not. I definitely do not live up to that title of being literate. The bar has been lowered quite a bit, and everything is more dumbed down now. And we intellectuals like to think that we're not affected by that, but in fact we are. What it means to be somebody who knows stuff, what it means to be a connoisseur of literature is not what it used to mean. So, I mean, idiocracy does not just affect the proles; it also affects those of us who think of ourselves as so-called intellectuals. All right. Well, now that I have read most of the Odyssey, I'm still working on it, almost through with it. I wanted to just comment on a few things that stood out to me. I'm interested, of course, in seeing what Nolan does with the material. There are some interesting things that kind of might alienate the modern reader in certain ways from a character like Odysseus or Ulysses, depending on the translation. Some translations favor the Greek, and the original Greek names for the characters and for the gods, but some favor the Roman translation for some reason. For those, I don't know the deeper meaning behind all of that, but supposedly in the Victorian age, it became vogue to use the Latin terms. I guess that Latin, that ancient Rome had gotten to be had achieved a certain vogue around that time. Maybe it was Edward Gibbon's and his books that that ushered this in. I don't know. Maybe not. But a couple things. The culture, of course, is different. The culture that informs the story, and it's one thing to talk about how, like, to approach literature with an agenda, and to say, oh well, this is bad because look at look at how it treats the female characters, or if you're some angry feminist, or I don't know, angry identity politics kind of person, and you're coming to read this stuff with a chip on your shoulder. That's obviously not the way to do it. You want to try to apprehend it on its own terms. But there are challenges to that. I found that, being able to sympathize with Odysseus is in many ways difficult, because he and his men are warriors, and they're engaging in this fierce and bloody war, which involves the sacking of cities and the slaughtering of civilians and the taking of women and girls for sex slaves. And this was all normal. This was how wars were fought back at that time. But it's kind of hard to see things like that and be able to say, well, that's just people understood these kinds of things as just being a normal part of war, right? It was just to the victor go the spoils, and but that's one thing. Another interesting thing, though, and this is less about customs changing, but another interesting thing. Well, it is about customs changing, but it's something a little more mysterious and kind of amusing. There are numerous passages where these men just weep copiously. It seems like they weep. Uh, um, it doesn't take too much to make them weep. They're an emotional group of guys, and you would think that this very macho, battle hardened group of soldier sailors wouldn't be like that. But over and over again, there's accounts of, them weeping because they're in danger, them weeping when they lose some of their comrades. Ulysses weeps many times, out of because he's homesick. Because I guess the main story of Ulysses, the main thing of the Odyssey, the thrust of the narrative is that after the sacking of Troy, which the war against Troy took 10 years in and of itself. So he's 10 years away from his home, 10 years away from his wife, and away from his family, away from everything that he knows. Then it took 10 years and 10 additional years for them to be able to make it back to Ithaca, and that a big part of the reason why Ulysses and a lot of the men don't make it at all, but the reason why it takes Ulysses so long to get back is because he has to follow this meandering course, because the gods are up to various things. Many of the gods are and the goddesses, the pantheon. Many of them, most of them are favor Ulysses or Odysseus. I'll stick with Odysseus here. Many of them favor Odysseus, but there are some who, for various reasons, are against him and try to thwart him. And so he has to go off on all of these kind of side quests. what would get called side quests today. He winds up in many situations where it's difficult to, he has to figure his way out of these situations, and oftentimes because Ulysses is, let's face it, a stud. He's the one of the, he's a great warrior and perfect body, and so a beautiful specimen of manhood. So all these goddesses want to keep him for themselves, and he gets stuck on Calypso's island for a long time. She won't let him leave. She wants to make him into a god, and then and during that time, I guess he then there's that incident, and then there's also the incident with Circe, who is a witch, but also somehow part of the divine pantheon. And now in these, to the Greeks, I suppose, there wasn't really much of a distinction between good gods and bad gods. They were all just powerful. And they all had different agendas, and there wasn't really as much of a notion of of Zeus being good, being the embodiment of everything that is good, the way that is conceived of in in the Western religions, the non-pagan religions, what gets called the monotheistic religions or the Abrahamic religions. I don't like that word Abrahamic. It's usually used pejoratively, and I'm a Catholic myself, but I'm not so much. I'm not going to. I can still read a play or an epic poem where the understanding of the heavenly pantheon is different, and still, without having to, I don't know, without being censorious, without approaching it with this kind of agenda or chip on my shoulder the way that others do. Oh, this isn't the way we feel now. This is wrong. This is bad because this violates our sensibilities. I think that's just wrong way to approach it. Totally. Ulysses gets, sorry, I did it again. Odysseus gets caught up, and has to take a lot of these horny goddesses to bed in order to tame them. Somebody's got to do it, so it's got to be him. Meanwhile, Penelope is back home. His wife is back home, mourning being without him, trying to fend off all of these pesky suitors who've camped out on their land, or eating their livestock and just behaving abominably, getting drunk every night. They're impatient for her. They want her to pick one of them, to decide that she's a widow now, that Odysseus must be dead, and she's got to pick a replacement, and they all want that to be one of them, because for obvious reasons, then they get to be the king of Ithaca. They get to take his place, but she has to kind of hold them at bay in various crafty ways. I don't think that the Odyssey is misogynistic, but I do think it's interesting that when someone on the couple of occasions when someone addresses Odysseus and asks, there's one king of a certain tribe who says, we'd like to have you stay here. I'd like to have you, a fine man like you. I'd like to have you marry my daughter. And Odysseus says, well, no, I can't. I appreciate the offer, but my home is where my ancestors are from, and I want to go back there and see my own house, see my belongings, see my land, the land that is my birth, and but he doesn't really mention Penelope that much. He doesn't say, my wife is waiting for me. I don't know what could be going on, what could possibly be going on with her, or with Telemachus, my son, who I left when he was just a little toddler. Now he's a young man, doing his best to protect his mother from these suitors. He doesn't talk that much about his specific family. He talks about how it's where he's from. It's the land of his ancestors. And I'm guessing that when Nolan's movie comes out, that they do something to play up the more romantic angle, to have him pine away for Penelope. I'm guessing they'll go that route, just because I think modern audiences are just not going to. It's just going to be like, what? Why is he just? Why isn't he ever talking about his wife? Why doesn't he miss her? Doesn't he love her? I mean, it's bad enough that he's sleeping with these goddesses and stuff. Um, I mean, it could be argued that he does that just because he has to, or because he's kind of, his hand has been forced, and this is the way, like with Cersei, it's a way of taming her. Um, and getting her to stop turning his men into pigs, um, and getting her to be on his side. But yeah, that's an interesting thing. So the there's that, and there's also the frequent weeping. Obviously, there wasn't as much of a stigma among the ancient Greeks of men weeping. Um, it wasn't, it's not that they were feminized. It was just, I guess, that a man could weep, in you know in certain situations, when his comrades are dying in awful ways, like when when they're stuck in the Cyclops den, and the Cyclops keeps picking up a couple of his men and just chowing down, uh, eating them whole. They're weeping over seeing these things happen to their comrades. And Odysseus also weeps a lot when he's on Calypso's island. He's always on the shore, looking in the direction of where Ithaca is, weeping. So it's not that there's not emotion. It just, we don't ever hear that he's weeping because he misses Penelope, who he's been away from, for 10 years, 15 years, and it's a full 20 years before he gets back and makes things right again. These are just a few thoughts, a few unfiltered thoughts, sort of rambling thoughts on reading the Odyssey. And I recommend it. It's not easy reading, but it's not terribly hard reading. You do have to just be in the kind of mode of, well, okay, this is an epic poem, so stuff is going to happen. There's just going to be a lot of side quests. There's going to be a lot of, a lot of things that befall them, and and some of them just seem to come out of nowhere, and some of them are really interesting. Some of them are exciting. There's some gruesome moments. There's some touching moments, but it's also, it also just kind of is a story that's he just goes around and around and around and around, a very circuitous way, because again, some of the gods, and most prominently Neptune, hates him and doesn't want him to get back. But the consensus among most of the gods is that he will get back to his hometown, but Neptune is allowed to sort of delay his arrival, whereas Athena, or in the translation I'm reading, she's Minerva, but in the original Greek, Athena comes to his aid often, and often appears in various guises. There's lots of, scheming. There's lots of, gods appearing in various forms, in human forms. There's, there's a lot of tricking. Like Odysseus making up stories, making up an alibi or an identity for himself, or saying this will happen or that will happen, in order to try to get people to get the other characters to do the things that he wants them to do. He's a wily, crafty man, in addition to being a great warrior. But that's it. I'll end it right there, and that's my take.